So, welcome to this Pluto in the 8th House podcast. Now, several people have requested this podcast, hence why I'm putting it out there now. And before I start, don't forget to subscribe and like. I really forget about these things when I make my podcast. I forget to say, don't forget to subscribe, like, and all that, because for me, it's just about the podcast. But guess what? The physical side of the podcast means that I really do appreciate people listening to it. I appreciate people talking about it, sharing it. I appreciate people getting some benefit from the whole thing. It really makes me happy because that's why I make them. Okay? As I understand that not everybody will be able to afford natal chart synthesis. Not everybody can afford the Prometheus program. Not everybody can afford to pay for my lectures. And so this is my own way of just saying, hey, look, even though this doesn't represent the integrated view that you would normally get when you focus on your own personal natal chart, it does contain some helpful information. I do really hope that a lot of people out there find it useful and they find these podcasts useful. Now, the podcasts themselves, because they're very general, they don't really focus on your problem as an individual. They don't, because I explain them and I describe them very generally. But my hope is that they help one way or the other, in some way or the other. But I will always advise that you come for your natal chart synthesis whenever you can. It doesn't matter if you can't afford it now. You can save up for it. That's what having a motive really is. If you want to do something, you can take time and save up for it. There's never any rush per se, no matter what it is that you feel. All right? It's not a magic bullet. If you get your synthesis today, it's not a magic bullet. What you will experience from your synthesis is a gradual change of perception that will help you to begin to see things in a new light so that you can address them from that new perspective. That's the biggest help that it can give to you, because ultimately you're still going to be the one to solve your problems. Now, the Prometheus program is a facilitation program which I have designed and implemented to help people, to guide them on that change process. So after your synthesis, if you want to move towards the whatever type of success is indicated in your synthesis, then the Prometheus program is designed to guide you on that journey. It's not going to provide a magic bullet for you. You're still going to have to solve your problems. But this time around, you're going to know exactly what to focus on month by month. And gradually the change will happen. It's for serious-minded people. It's for people who really have that need to change, to move towards their success. Success is not a theoretical concept. It's a real, tangible thing, and it is different for everybody. The most important thing about success is to recognize what your type of success looks like. Don't go chasing someone else's type of success, because it's not going to make you happy. Your success is sufficient for you, and it's supposed to make you happy. It will make you happy. Okay? If only you know what it is and you can satisfy it. Okay? Not everybody's success is to make millions and millions of dollars, even though that helps. But it's not the definition of success for most people. You'll be surprised how many people don't have this as the definition of their success. Okay, and I've talked about this across several podcasts. Don't leave your success and start chasing someone else's definition of success, because the world squeezes everybody, and without money, nobody can live. So everybody begins to imagine that money is the only thing that they need in their reality. But guess what? Your success, when you know what it is, it will make money secondary. Why? Because money will come to you not because you're chasing it, but as a byproduct of your own success. And yet the money is not the goal. Alright? You only have to try it to recognize the power of what I'm saying. If you haven't tried it, then you probably think I'm just talking smoke. But it's very real. Okay? And until you actually experience it, you wouldn't know how real it is. And the only way to experience it is to come for your own synthesis. Your synthesis is very private, it's very unique to you, but it will touch on what makes the essence of your success different from everybody else's. Okay? So your synthesis is not a rush. If you need 2, 3 months, 4 months to put it together, why not? Take your time. It's even encouraging because there's a discipline behind that type of behavior. And that shows a very strong intent. And your intention, your will, it's a very powerful thing, because when you are motivated to do something, you do it. You get it done. Okay? Now, Pluto, I've talked about many times. In fact, my recent podcast that I just published, Pluto in the 9th house, goes into great detail talking about Pluto. So we're not going to rehash all of those things, save for the fact that Pluto is where you are tremendously afraid. And you are afraid of a certain type of truth that sits in that area. Most especially, you're afraid of your own power. You are afraid of what it means and what it implies, so you run away from it. So all Pluto journeys are characterized by two aspects. There's the running away, and then there's the realization that brings you back. Okay? Now, any house that you find Pluto in, it is saying that the conditions of that house, the matters of that house, that's where you're going to encounter that truth, and that's where you're going to run away from initially. Okay, so when Pluto is in the 8th house, Pluto is in its own house. And when you have this in your natal chart, Pluto in its own house, then it means that all the Plutonic activities, the Plutonic understandings, the entire theater that Pluto and Scorpio would normally thrive in, right? They're sitting very naturally in your life, in your natal chart. So Pluto is in its own house, telling you that it is sitting very comfortably. Of all the places it can be, that's where it is, because it's at home. And so what that simply means is that all the natural issues or things that emanate, or discourses, or whatever you want to call them, all the perceptions that have to do with 8th house activities, that's where you're going to encounter the Pluto. So this is someone who traditionally runs away from everything that is deeply sexual. All forms of intimacy are like kryptonite to this person in the very early stages of their development. And early stages simply means that it could be even 50 years, you still haven't realized this because you're running away. Okay, it's not a time limit in some sense. It's basically the moment when you are confident enough, or you can't degrade any further, okay, where you have no choice but to embrace your truth. Now, I hope it doesn't get to that point for you. And it is very advisable that when Pluto is in the 8th house, you don't let it get to that point for you. Why? Because in this house, you are in the house of all possible transformations that can take something and change it completely, entirely. Now, we don't want the type of transformations that are final, in the sense that they are tremendously powerful and final, like death. We don't want those types of transformations, but all those types of transformations, they are sitting in the 8th house in some sense. All right. Now, if you've been listening to my podcast, you've heard me talk about death as an illness of humankind, like aging and death. They're not things that actually belong to human reality, but it is very difficult to convince anyone of this without absolute evidence. And that's why I said about providing this absolute evidence. And I've done a lot of work in this area, but the work is still very theoretical. You know, it's all mathematics based and it's all philosophy based, but it's correct. Okay. Ultimately, I will work with other people to try to develop the physicalization of these concepts, to actually test them out in laboratories in terms of healthcare systems, to improve human health in such a way that human beings don't die anymore. You know, people don't get sick anymore, and people don't get ill anymore. People don't age anymore. I want a human being to stay at whatever age you choose. For instance, you can choose to be 30 years forever. It doesn't mean that your experiences in your head will not accumulate your age, but your physical body is not degrading. And it's not a fantasy. It's not at all. It's actual physics. And if you don't understand the physics, then you don't understand what I'm talking about. Okay? Because the tendency we see for everything around us is to degrade. And we think that that's the way that things are supposed to be. Well, that's not true. Human beings are not supposed to die. And the concept of death is something that it's linked in some way traditionally to the 8th house because of the type of transformations that happen there. Okay? But the 8th house is not talking about death. It's just talking about changes. And usually, when you have Pluto in the 8th house, it is because your life contains many layers like an onion. Okay? And the thing about an onion is that as you remove one layer, you get to see another layer. And all the layers, they seem self-similar in some sense. Almost like a fractal. Okay? But in this case, where Pluto is in the 8th house, even though the transformations are self-similar, they are revealing a nucleus. The idea is that the truth only exists as that nucleus. And that nucleus is what I call the core. So around everybody with Pluto in the 8th house, there is a powerful truth. It is so powerful. That's why Pluto is in the 8th house. It's so powerful in the life story of the person. It allows Pluto to sit in its own house, in its own domain, comfortably. That posture is telling you that there is something very, very good about the expression of Plutonic activities in your life. You can think of it as pre-programmed metamorphosis, you know, like a caterpillar. Like a larvae that turns into a caterpillar, or an egg that turns into a larvae, and a larvae that turns into a caterpillar, and a caterpillar that turns into a pupa, and a pupae that turns into a butterfly. It's metamorphosis. Pluto in the 8th house is talking about personality metamorphosis. You're going to change as a person, and with each change will come new revelations, not of the world, but of yourself. Why? Because when you sit down and you try to think of yourself, you cannot really access your deepest truth. Now, it's not a question of having a strong will. That's not the way that it works. It's about the fact that despite your strong will, these changes are inevitable. And when they begin to happen, there will be a natural resistance from you because your will does not like change. I mean, the will is your sun. It belongs to the fixed sign of Leo. It will try to resist change, and then a battle ensues. And that is usually what the transformation is all about. It's about you learning to let go. So your will not be able to stop the transformation. It will just create the period of crisis where it will seem as if your will is being broken down by external agencies. This is one of the downsides of all Plutonic transformations. You always feel like the transformer is external. And you will see it as external, but the real transformation is happening and driven by an internal process. If you're not ready for the transformation, it can kill you. So the idea is to be ready for the transformation. And that's what this podcast is aiming to introduce to you. That the transformation itself is something that you need to constantly prepare for. You need to prepare to see the end of things that no longer serve you. It's not a question of whether you assess them as such or not. The internal assessment is what is taking place. And it is taking place based on the nature of a very deep truth. A truth that you cannot touch. And so when things no longer serve you, they will disappear from your life one way or the other, whether you are ready for them or not. And the life lesson may revolve around the fact that the individual is not ready to let go of any of these things. And so the struggle is real, where the individual feels like they are being attacked or periodically brutalized by some type of external agency, which they may identify and pattern after something. Or it may just be a spiritual type of thing, which they assume that there must be spiritual forces that are attacking them or antagonizing them or blocking them or whatever it is. That's because they have not been able to assess and come to terms with their own power. Because when Pluto is in the 8th house, you've got a tremendous amount of sexual power. It's right there, whether you are aware of it or not. And that sexual power is a statement of the type of truth that is sitting within you. There is something that is so deep within you and true that you are so afraid of it, you yourself, you brand that aspect of yourself a taboo. And so you seal it off and confine it to an underworld category. You confine it as something evil to be exorcised in some sense. And you will pursue various ways of exorcism without realizing that that's what you're doing. You will pursue different ways of transforming yourself. Almost like you would pursue different ways of freeing yourself from some type of obsessive stronghold. But the only obsessive stronghold there is that you have been given a gift that you cannot accept yet. And what is that gift? Pluto in the 8th house is all about power. It's a sexual power and it is very deep. And so it can't really be exorcised in some way. You have been brought into the domain of the core. And your challenge is to find the most beautiful and true way to see that core. It's not always easy. Why? Because the places where you will encounter the core, they're very frightening. For instance, if you have Pluto in the 8th house, right? You will have more than your fair share of jealousy. Why? Because you're a jealous person. Now, the fact that you are such a jealous person is the part that you cannot accept. And so you abscond it, you send it away into some unknown land. Alright? Because you will posture yourself, you will imagine yourself that, oh, you have no degree of envy inside you and that people are always envious to you. Yes, you are right in the sense that people are always envious of you. It's the cross you have to bear when you have Pluto in the 8th house. But guess what? The reason why that is like that is because that is exactly what you are. And so you may posture yourself as fighting this envious people. Yes. But the reason why you are fighting them is not obvious to you. Your transformation comes when you begin to realize that, wait a second, you are actually the nucleus of your own envy. And you don't know how to deal with it. And so you find yourself in a lot of power struggles. Very silent but very pervasive power struggles. Anything that has to do with sharing and the depth of intimacy, it's like a war zone for you. You are so frightened by it that you posture yourself as someone who is so self-offering and self-giving. But that's not true. Deep within you, there is a shrewdness in all matters that have to do with intimacy. You are so frightened of being abandoned. You are so frightened of being rejected that you posture yourself in such a way that you can evade that fear. So after all, if you're not really connected to anything, if you're not really committed to anything, then the actual threat of abandonment does not exist. Okay? If you're not really connected to anything, then what is the fear of rejection? It doesn't exist. So you see that in its own way, Pluto in the 8th house really is concerned about the fear of intimacy. Why? Because there is a nagging fear deep within the person that once you connect with anything permanently, so intimately and deeply, then that thing disappears. It dies. So Pluto in the 8th house really is the fear of death. That's really what it is. This same fear, it manifests in different ways according to the themes of different houses, wherever you find Pluto in any of the houses. In the 8th house, there is no fanciful narrative between you and that fear. You see the fear directly, and then you run away from it. The solution is to run towards it, not away from it. The solution is to embrace the fact that you are an individual that has signed up to Metamorphosis. Why? Because you are the type of person that no one can really know just from meeting you first time or second time or even third time or even after several years. They never really know who you are. Have you ever heard of Russian nested dolls? Russian dolls, they come in different sizes. They're nested dolls. Well, that's what you are. All the way down to the core. You see, because at the root of your core, you are all desire. Oh my goodness. Just throbbing, beating, pulsing desire. And what is that desire? It is the desire to unite. The desire to unite with another, to merge powerfully, because you recognize it as the source of all power. Why? Because you want to be a core. You can already feel like a core. And I want you to understand what a core is. Now, outside of the Prometheus program, I don't really go into the details of what a core is. Suffice to say that I just say that the core is your sexual nature, the deepest, most potent aspect of your sexual nature. And it is the thing that is actually born. As a human being, you experience being a core, but you are not a core. Why? Because the human dies. And the core does not die. The human ages. The core does not age. From the core comes space-time. So how can it experience space-time? The core is the truth that sits behind everything. If you want to think of it this way, God gave birth to the core. And the core it's like an arithmetic truth. Even though that's just one way of saying it. But what it really is are those sixes I keep talking about. 3 of them. That's really what it is. It doesn't change. It doesn't move. It is the organizational strategy that patterns everything, including the very thoughts in your head. Without it, we cannot do astrology. It won't make any sense. When you're talking about astrology, you're talking about the relationship that exists between things, such that the very patterns that exist in your head and the very patterns that you see in the cosmos, they have a symphony. Well, why would that be the case? There's no other reason why it should be the case. The reason why such things are possible is because they all come from one thing. The core. And what I'm doing with my 5 principles of organized complexity is to show what these relationships are, how they are one thing. In the Prometheus program, we delve right into the nature of the core. Because the challenge of the human being is to see the core as what it really is, in the most beautiful and truthful form that it can be, rather than from the perspective of the animals. Because there's a perspective that you're going to have. You're going to see the core as a very brutal thing. Because from it comes all the urges that allow people to fight and compete and want to kill each other. They're struggling over something, but at the end of the day, when you look at whatever it is that they're struggling about, there's nothing there. That's the lesson of Pluto in the 8th house, is that these urges, what do they really mean? Can you really see their truth? Because you might think that you're competing for money. You might think you're competing for sex or for power. But what do these things really mean? Alright? What does money do? If you take somebody who is poor and you give him a lot of money, billions of dollars, what are they going to do with it? They have no idea what to do with it. But what's going to happen to them is that an aspect of their behavior that has already been there, it has always been there, but has not been able to come out because it's almost like it's locked. It cannot find expression. Those places now begin to find expression. And the individual begins to become very different. But they are not different. It's the same person. They are just unrestricted now. And that's what Pluto in the 8th house is really talking about, is that you are going to go through periods of your life where the deeper and much deeper layers of your personality are going to have a means of coming out. Okay? If you don't want to shock everybody else in your reality, well, you have to understand what these things are, because you are someone who is constantly in the presence of your core. You can feel it, and you've always felt it, and it is frightening. Because the interpretations that will allow you to see it in the most beautiful light, those interpretations are not there. The idea is that your life is going to supply those interpretations, which will allow you to elevate that. But resistance to this can bring a lot of painful experiences. And all the painful experiences come from the fact that you find it very difficult to let go. Whatever it is that you hold on to with a deadly grip. Why? Because death is a separation of some kind. And Pluto in the 8th house, the deepest fear really revolves around the loss of the loved one. The one that you love the most. The male, female, he created them. It's not two different individuals, but the other side of yourself that is now lost forever in death, which is the deepest fear that a person with Pluto in the 8th house can have. And the way that they deal with that fear is that they just refrain from that level of commitment with anything or anyone. And yet they cannot escape that level of commitment. So there is a tug of war. And it's very pre-programmed in that sense. That is, it is pre-programmed and designed to force the person through various periods of transformations. It's like something that you cannot eat at once and then you now have to swallow it in various sized morsels just to allow you to be able to digest it. Okay? And this can be a very cathartic experience for people. The key issue is the fear of abandonment, the fear of being lost and transformed away from everything that you can imagine. It's the fear of death. And overcoming this fear is a primary instinct for Pluto in the 8th house. Now, the best way to overcome the fear is to face the fear. I'm not saying go and embrace death or something like that, but figuratively, that's what I'm saying. Embrace the transformations, knowing fully well that there's really nothing you can do to stop them from coming. They will always come. But the mindset is not that of resistance. You don't want the final transformation like death. You want the transformation that allows you to embrace a change of residence. Suddenly it just happens that you have to move to a new country. Be prepared for it. Now, it doesn't mean that you cannot form roots or you cannot form attachments. Yeah, but you can now understand what they mean. That you are not really attached to one thing in particular. You're attached to everything. You're not really attached to one person. You're attached to everyone. Okay? Pluto in the 8th is also a statement about the nature of inheritance and the type of redemptive activities that come from encountering things that are taboo-like in society. And from the point of view of inheritances, Pluto in the 8th house may indicate a kind of deep struggle or deep complication regarding the nature of inheritances. Now, the idea is that Pluto in the 8th house is always a story about the entanglement of deep webs of deceit, webs of lies, webs of envy, webs of possessiveness, webs of betrayal, etc. The redemptive aspect of this process is the untangling of those webs, because only truth can set a person free. And so part of the transformative effects of Pluto in the 8th house is the breaking down, what I call the catharsis in some sense, where you are completely enveloped by your way of life to the point where you have no choice anymore than to be redeemed, than to be transformed, than to make a change. It's like setting everything on fire so that new growth can begin. It's something like that. Almost more often than not, Pluto in the 8th house talks about one specific relationship in your life. The relationship that changes everything. It is the relationship that starts the cascade of the dominoes that leads to the transformation. Because even though there are many transformations in the life of a person with Pluto in the 8th house, there is one primary one. And the primary transformation is to reorient the person towards their life mission, whatever that is. The 8th house is the house where the type of connections that are made with another person are the most serious and the most profound type of relationships and connections that can be made. That's where the Pluto is. And so the deepest type of transformation will come from a love relationship. Now, the reason why this is the case is that the individual with Pluto in the 8th house is really looking for the deepest possible type of connection with another person. A connection that transcends death itself. And the test of fire is what makes for fine steel. These people will put whomever they love or whomever they attach this type of notion to, they will put them through the test of fire. If the person survives, then they can ascertain that that person is true love or something like that. Okay? Talk about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Directed at a mate, that is. So the type of careers that Pluto in the 8th house normally are drawn to, they are drawn to places or things that can allow them to experience this fear because they really want to be free of it. They just don't know how. For instance, they can be law enforcement. They can be drug enforcement. They could also do the converse. They could be dealers. They could be whatever it is, underhanded. They could be masters of the underworld, powerful manipulators. And there is a lesson with Pluto in the 8th house. You see, you have to be in those types of committed situations for the right reasons, because the tendency is to avoid those right reasons by trying to be shrewd. But those games are the things that will lead to the transformations. And usually in the first half of the experience, the person is sowing these seeds that will ultimately lead to the transformation. Say, for instance, you want to get married, but you're not marrying the person because that's what that Pluto needs. You're marrying the person because you want something from that relationship. And there's nothing wrong with this. The problem occurs when the two aspects of the motives are discordant with each other. So there is a lie there. And Pluto in the 8th house means that your reality that you're experiencing, you will ultimately come face to face with your own truth, your own authentic truth as it is. If you create a barrier, then that barrier will be destroyed in the process. Well, if that barrier is instituted by something like kind of a business partnership that is false, or a marriage that is false, well, those things will be transformed, meaning that they will be destroyed eventually in the process towards taking you to your core. So what is the point of erecting them? But nobody gets to tell you these things. These are things that you get to find out yourself, because even if someone told you, you won't be able to resist. There's an obsessive compulsiveness when you have Pluto in the 8th house. And you are drawn to these transformations like a moth is drawn to a flame, because you have to be burned up in it somehow in order to recreate or reenact your true self, which is like a phoenix rising from the flames. You are so drawn to the transformation because it's your only way to accept your truth. If the truth came just at you like that, you couldn't accept it. You know, it would be so terrible. You couldn't accept it. And the lack of acceptance is an extremely destructive thing. You just could not accept it. So in some way, the transformations are designed for piecemeal acceptances. And so don't expect to have smooth, intimate relationships. No. You couldn't accept those either. That's a relationship that just goes, one way, you marry at 25 and then you marry for 60 years and all that. It's not possible. And if it happens to you, then there are so many compensating factors somewhere. All right? Because it's simply not possible. Not because it can't happen. It's because you won't accept it. Because you're not the same person when you're 25 and when you're 35. Now, most people will say this, that they're not the same person because you grow up. But for the Pluto in the 8th house person, there is nothing more profound than such a statement. They are really not the same person. From age to age, they are very different. And the difference shows up in many different ways. They could even go from one career to one that is completely opposite. It's such a radical change, but it's not unexpected when you have Pluto in the 8th house. Pluto in the 8th house is basically telling you that your life is going to contain things that appear to change things so tremendously or so definitively. It's almost like they're two different things, but they're not. You are the connection between them. And that's because there's a part of you that is changing like that as you come closer and closer to the truth of your own existence, which is that you don't want to die. That's really what it is. It's a very powerful thing. Pluto in the 8th house, you have a relationship with death in some sense, but it's a figurative relationship. The finality of it is something that it's like you're staring into it all the time and you don't know what it means and you want to understand what it means. On the other side, this makes for a powerful connection sexually if you can find that connection with another person. The danger is that if you exhibit or you establish such a connection with another human being, they better be like you. Because anyone who's not like you, they can't handle that connection. It's too intense. Why? Because death is the great unknown. What happens afterwards is the great unknown, the great mystery, right? And that's what you're drawn to so powerfully that if anybody embodies that to you, then you will keep digging and digging and digging because you want to get to the other side. Now, what does that look like in a relationship with another person? It's an obsessiveness to get to the root of what that person is. And that person is just like you. Whatever mystery you hope to find at the root, it's the same mystery that exists in you. And that is the reason why you're digging like that. Because what you really want to understand is the mystery that exists within you. As long as both of you are in alignment in this motive, then it should work. But if one person is not aware, then no relationship can really survive that. And so Pluto in the 8th house is characterized by these tempestuous relationships. That is, relationships that are very intense, but then lead to extremes of behavior that transform both individuals in such a way. They might start out as the greatest loves and end up thoroughly hating each other, trying to undo each other in some sense. So these are very powerful things that you need to handle with care, with wisdom, with understanding. And this podcast hopefully forms like a base for this type of understanding. Now, you would say, but why have you been made to feel that way? Or why have you been given that? Well, the answer can only be found in the rest of the natal chart. Everyone is given whatever they need for their life story. If you're given Pluto in the 8th house, which means that you have to go through metamorphosis, especially in the area of intimate relationships, all right, then there is something there that you are supposed to discover for yourself. You're supposed to discover the truth of what you are. And it's an absolute type of truth, especially because we're talking about where death is concerned. So it's an absolute type of truth. And usually what that means is that there is something about your relationship with God that you want to establish permanently and firmly. There is a knowing there to be had. And until you discover what that is, it will torment you. Okay? Now, Pluto in the 8th house is a generator. A very powerful generator. And the only reason why you would probably want that type of powerful generator sitting within your consciousness is because it is the generator for achieving what? Ambition. So people who have Pluto in the 8th house, they have a powerful, very powerful ability to achieve. That is, they can summon from deep within them motives that it doesn't exist within them right now. When they transform into a different type of person, it's almost like they transform into someone with a different set of abilities or capabilities. And so they can reach down into the depth of the psyche and pull out motives from there. They can keep going when everything appears lost. When it's as if there's no more hope. These people just keep grinding on because as long as they're alive, there is hope. You understand? Because they understand the finality of death. Pluto in the 8th house reminds me of people who still carry the memory of their death in some sense. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is, because I don't subscribe to those types of fatalistic interpretations, because the entire natal chart is a complex system carrying all sorts of information, right? It's never that clear cut per se. So until the entire natal chart is established, such statements, well, you can't really give them that much credibility. But that's what it looks like, okay? Because of the emphasis. Now, ultimately, the solution for these people is that they must come to terms with that fear of death. They must get their blood pumping, their hearts racing, because that is what they expect. If they find themselves in situations where this is not possible, they will overturn those situations. They will undermine it. And because they have Pluto in the 8th house, then there is no patterning of these emotions that arise from the core. The root of these emotions is a very deeply sexual thing. So whether it's money, power, sex, they have all the patterns that come out of these things. They recognize this within themselves. Now, if they find themselves distancing themselves away from such things, then it's either they have tasted it, realized how destructive it is, and they don't want any part of it, or they're in denial. Because I can assure you that there's no one who is capable of more envy than them. There's no one who's capable of all these things than them. That is why they need to transform. They're drawn to the transformation because the transformation itself is their ability to abandon these very primitive desires. Because with these primitive desires, they can become very destructive. They can hurt a lot of people. So most of them naturally, because they cannot sit that thing, they cannot be identified as those things. So they will pursue the transformations to free them from those things. But they must experience those things in order to be free of them. Do you understand? Initially, they feel themselves as taboos. So they are drawn to situations that literally undermine them. Situations that self-sabotage them in some way, so they can experience the difficulty that allows them to transform. And there is no greater arena where they find these things than in relationships with other people. It's not a conscious motive. It's a very deeply unconscious one. Their fears will guide them towards, it's an obsessiveness in some sense. They will create all the tumultuous conditions that transform them through these relationships. It's not the fault of the other per se. It's not entirely their fault. But if nobody knows what is going on, then you can see a situation where there's a whole lot of blame flying around. But these people need to transform because they need to transform the meaning of the core within themselves. What types of circumstances transform someone who feels very, very unworthy into someone who feels very worthy? They need to find a noble cause. And sometimes the noble cause is burning up in the flame, that they know that they won't die. They will just arise as something else, a phoenix of some kind. Okay? So these are not the people that you write off. You know, the cat has 9 lives. These people probably have uncountable number of lives. And the interesting thing is that because of that, they suffer figurative deaths many, many times. but they suffer in silence. Usually nobody knows what's going on. And it is these internal sufferings that bring about the transformations, because they build up gradually. And at some point in time, maybe coinciding with 1 or 2 transits, they shed their skin in some sense. They break out of the mold, okay, as if it is confining them, but they manage to break out of it. And the breakout period is never easy. Why? Because they're very tempestuous. During those periods, you probably hear things that you never even thought possible for them to say or for them to feel, but they felt it all. Because you're dealing with someone whose emotional sensitivities are connected to the core. So every whim and caprice that can originate from issues of sex, money, or power, they have felt it. They're feeling it right now. Their life now appears to be some type of management program where they are managing these impulses within themselves. But they cannot stand the fact that they're like this. So they seek out these arenas for transformation. Okay? Because they can rightly sense very intuitively, because there's a very spiritual, when I say spiritual, I have to define what I really mean. They can have access to the depth of knowledge that their mouths cannot explain to you. They can't really tell you what they feel or how they just feel it. And they feel it with a great intensity. Okay? Now, some of them, if they go through enough transformations and develop their minds from the process, they may begin to be able to voice out what these things mean. You find a lot of memes talking about transformation. Where do you think they come from? It's produced by people like this after going through such fire, such traumatic, painful fires. The difference is that they can handle it. It's almost like they need it in some sense. Now, they cannot activate it consciously. So it is all done unconsciously. But what happens is that over a period of years, as they grow up towards maturity, very few things come to faze them. They've seen it all. They've experienced it all. I mean, what kind of evil do you think is really out there? Well, Pluto in the 8th house has somehow experienced it all, because there's really nothing more whatever than death. And they're constantly thinking about death. They will never tell you that, but they're constantly thinking about it. They're constantly being afraid of it. Now, at some point in time, they let go of that fear. It's always tied to a series of activities or a time period in their life where they are freed from that fear. Now, you now find somebody who is what? It's almost like they're jumping towards fear. What are you doing? The person wants to be, they want to do things that are risky and all that. It's almost like they begin to try to tempt fate in some sense. It's not a temptation of fate. It's the fact that they realize at some point in time that they are filled with so much intensity that not experiencing that intensity is almost akin to being not alive. Okay? So within the boundaries, and I must say this, when Pluto is in the 8th house, there are always control systems that stops the person from dying. At least that's the general idea. Okay? Because if you are very susceptible to dying, there's no point you embracing things that get your blood pumping up, because it could kill you. So what's the point? And the thing about life is that there is always a point. Okay? So there are control systems, and they're very complex. Most of them are wired to Saturn and the conditions of Mars, designed to restrain, because you want to be excited and feel your blood racing, but you don't want to commit suicide. So you have to be able to tell the difference, the balance between these things, and then find that balance and implement it, because the idea is for you to grow into a richness of life. Okay? Not to kill yourself.